Hello and welcome to Share.Care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.Care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.Care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.Care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
G'day, Natalie. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, great for us here in the southern part of the world. We're coming towards that colder period where we're getting into the winter space. But I guess people listening in the northern hemisphere have got the opposite. They're going into summer. But we're starting to rug up here. Although not so much for you because you're in Queensland.
Yeah, not in Queensland. It's still warm days.
I'm in Melbourne, which Melbourne's kind of it can be sunny, can be rainy, can be everything all in one day.
Yes.
For the audience, I have here with me the lovely Nathalie Southwell, and Nathalie is a mum of a 10-year-old boy. So from that perspective of what we're talking about, what is manly is very relevant to a mum bringing up a boy, and how do we do that? How do we guide that? From your experience, Nathalie, what have you seen in this space? Because there's a lot of lots of reports out there of men, both young and old, being lost, lonely, not useful in society. What have you experienced in that space where seeing that for men not having direction?
Just in my personal experience, I think men that I have only by chance, because you don't know anything about someone until you've met. You can't just go around. I love when women say, "Oh, you just picked them" or something. No, because they don't come with a blurb above them, so you don't know. So it's by chance that the ones that I have met actually have all lacked mother figures. Not that is the answer to everything, but by not having that, they've just found their own way in the world.
Did you say lacked mother figures or father?
Mother figures.
Mother figures.
Which is somewhat the opposite to the general idea of, I was foreign to the idea until, I've met a few and their mothers that either had terrible upbringing because they've had, drug, alcohol issues, abuse, or they've had, I had a partner whose mother just pretty much just left at the age of 11 or 12, really not explained and just sort of didn't come back.
Wow.
And so I compare stories that I've heard from people I've dated, people I've not dated around my son's age now as well. So it's constantly rethinking about, well, what is manly? What direction do we want them to go in? Who leads? Who leads this? And whose opinion is the best?
Yeah. It's an interesting point that you raised because, like you said, it's not something that's common when we talk about this space. For men, I mean, there's obviously talk about men not having father figures, but not having mother figures. Yeah. So that's an interesting point. How did you think, from what you've experienced, how do you think that affected them? What do you think it was about the mother figure that's important that was missing?
Probably just for the fact, obviously, after being in personal relationships with them, and a few of them admitted it themselves, because they didn't essentially have a good base model of what, love and affection and all this is, in partners, not only are they not sure what they're looking for or what they want from a personal partner, they don't know what sort of man that they should be because of that as well. Because if they only take the direction of their father, within it, their fathers are absent as well. And then they come, sort of always seems to be then maybe a stepfather figure. And we think, good on the stepfather, but he's got issues too. I mean, so it's just this never-ending cycle. So I find a lot of them are just trying to figure it out themselves, and they do a lot of it from social media, pop culture, anything that they can find, their ideas or their grandfather's stories. I mean, something that just gets lost among the generations. They're trying to reinforce things bit by bit, but only the things they like. So
okay, so when you say only the things they like, what will
or agree with, so they'll be thinking, I want, their idea of being manly is men should do this and men should do that, and then there'll be responsibilities of their idea of a man or what makes them manly by having the job and doing this and that. But then there'll be some sort of experience they've had or idea that there's nearly a disdain for women as well. So they also don't want her to stay at home. They wanted to stay at home. They wanted to be there for him, but they also wanted to work and be equal.
Yeah, so they're kind of, it seems like it's a really interesting point that you raised there. So want the woman to have all the responsibility as such, it sounds like, as opposed to them having responsibility. Is that?
Yeah. It's like there's not enough. It's like it's not enough to have like a partner, a wife, or, whatever that is at home. And that's okay. And that she is still valuable. And he's valued as a male. But then there's also living in such a different world. They're going to work with men whose wives work. But then those men have different opinions of, my wife works, but she won't stay at home and she won't do this and she won't do that. So everybody's always unsatisfied at some point. But when we're talking traditional constructs, it's funny that there's a lot of men out there that are willing and they say that they love traditional home settings and things, but not to the full extent. And I found the opinion differs for men that I've actually who've had daughters as well. So the ones that just have sons, the opinion's very different to those that then have daughters, because they want.
What way?
So they'll want I hope my son finds a wife and has a home and they do all that settling down. But to their daughter, no, I don't want my daughter settling down. I don't want my daughter to just be a stay-at-home mum. I want to get a career and make money and be independent. I think everybody's situations change, and as time goes on, one had a son and then not long after had a daughter, so you can only imagine how he felt within those first years, then had a daughter and had to change it all around. So it's a constant changing, and nobody really knows where they're getting their ideas from.
Do you think it is that, because we look at it, we said the traditional construct, do you think part of that is this back then, and not saying it was right or wrong, but back, when we go look at that traditional construct, there was a very clear definition of what was the expectation. And now we're in a point where we've got infinite choice. We can be anything. That's part of what we grew up with. I know my generation, we go, my dad, and I look at my dad, he had the same, worked in the same organization his entire career, never thought about, well, maybe he did, but I'm not aware of him actually thinking, he certainly didn't make any effort to go and do something different. And that was completely okay. Whereas for me, that was not something that, for me, staying in the same organization was never going to happen. Do you think it's part of that? The problem that we have now is that because we don't have that clear definition, and I'm not saying we should go to a one clear definition. The point I'm asking is, we've got to a point where people can have any choice they want, essentially, but we haven't taught people how to make a choice. Do you think that's a problem?
Yeah, because the problem is sometimes I think there's too many choices.
And if you don't know how to make a choice, how do you do something?
exactly. And you know, you need to, you know, form your choices based on people's opinions you respect or things you've seen or whatever. The problem is people get an idea in a story, I want to be like that woman or that mother and I want to do this and this. They don't ask the right questions, I think, a lot of the time, you know. For example, I want to be educated, do this and this, and they'll go, oh, you can go into this field, you can make this money, you can travel here. And they're not discussing what it took for them to get to that point, what sacrifices they've had to make.
I was going to ask that
From the
question.
perspective of a female, you know, and, you know, not to go too bloody broad at once, but I mean, it's something always has to give. Therefore, I mean, I think, I can't quote it, but I know there's an average of over 50% of women at the age of 30 are childless. And that's a sacrifice. So, and they'll explain, well, to do this and to do that, I had to sacrifice my most fertile years, and now I struggle with this. So I think a lot of people
That's a big problem now. What you're mentioning is a massive problem where there's women that have focused on their career and now trying to have children. And I think it is around the 35% to it's a very high rate that can't have children.
Yeah.
Because it's gone.
Yeah. And that's just like naturally when we're not even talking about the modern world with that age gap. Now we're talking about that age in the modern world that's influenced by everything from environment, medication, food, everything that makes fertility even harder at that age. So it's like an uphill battle.
Yeah. So where do men fit into that? How do we balance that from that perspective of,
I don't know. I think there needs to be a lot more serious discussions, or I guess earlier on in life. We live in such a day and age still where we discourage having children early because it will ruin your life, and I think that conversation still happens a lot. You know,
it's fascinating because I've talked to a number of people that did that they made that choice. They got together and it was in high school, early university, got married at 18, had children, and their lives are pretty phenomenal. So this whole thing of having children early wrecks your life. I don't know if that's entirely true. Yeah.
I mean, not in the day and age we're living in, because we're always trying to find the next answer or the next support for choices. So for, you know, traditional households, you know, my mother's born in 61, for example. So it went from, you know, she went with the traditional construct. That wasn't their plan, but as soon as she had my son, the mutual decision was made, I would like to stay at home. And that wasn't the plan. And my father said, no worries at all, but we will be broke. She said, I don't care. And that was her choice. You know, that's everybody's choice. I know a lot of women that would go, oh, no. Actually, no, I'll work. Or I'll do this. Or then there'll be, these are the problems with, you know, manly or men's roles. We've got to double the pressure on him.
So how does that, I mean, from that perspective of when you look at it, when you're looking at his son, thinking ahead and going, okay, how do you prepare him for that?
I have a lot of opinions, obviously. I'm very open and very honest with him, very blunt. I've been told for a long time that I am probably not, nothing's ever age appropriate when I'm discussing it with him.
Is there an age appropriate? I mean, these discussions should happen earlier.
To me, I think it's a relationship appropriateness. The style of mother-son relationship we have suits the ability for us to have these types of conversations. Yeah. Because I spent formative years not informing opinions on him, teaching him how to form an opinion and how to listen to him. So these sorts of things now allow him or me, when I'm listening to him, to either really question him, to know that he knows what he wants or he's actually listened, or at least to know that if I don't like his opinion or I don't agree, I have to respect it because he's within the bounds of being 10 years old. He's done a very good informative choice.
I love what you said, because that comes back to the point we raised earlier about people making their own decisions. And it sounds like from that perspective, I mean, is that part of this framework when we're looking at, what is a framework for being manly? Part of that foundation is starting earlier. Okay, what do you choose for your life? Mm-hmm. Having, with obviously in certain age appropriateness, but I mean, we hear about this all the time when we even talk about things like midlife crisis, where people have done what they should have been doing, what they were told to do, and they get to the point and go, I'm actually not happy with that. I don't want to be doing that. Whereas we need to be encouraging people to make their own choice. Mm-hmm. So when we especially, when we in this topic, and I think it applies to both genders, but to, from a male perspective, it seems to be really prevalent that men need to make that choice as to what's right for them. As to, is that, something that you think is appropriate for your son?
Yeah, I think he definitely, which is obviously always strange when it comes from a woman. And I've been called anti-feminist before, and I feel terrible. But I say a lot of things to my son that are based on, I say your life will be hard because you're a man. I know that's terrible, but
there's a lot of people that argue life is hard anyway. So
it is in general, but when I talk about the world we're living in now, which is very, very brief on human history, he's in for a world of trouble. And
in what way?
There's not much he'll be able to do right. And if he does get it right, he may still be wrong. And he can work hard.
But is that part of that life where we go, okay, do we need to, as men, accept and I mean, I'm getting a little bit facetious here, but isn't that part of, and we're talking about a stereotypical male-female relationship here, but generally it's whatever the man says is wrong anyway. He just has to accept that, and she can change her mind at any time, and that's just part of life. And I know I'm being a little bit facetious with that, but is that part of it? Seemed to be when I look at my grandparents, my dad's dad in particular, he was always, my dad tells me his dad said to him when he was young, what your mum says goes, and that was, it was just, whether it doesn't matter. She said it. If she changes her mind, it still goes. You just have to accept that. Is that, even though we are a slightly different time now, but is that, it seems to be that still is the go.
Yeah, even more so now, because it's no longer a joke. It's quite literal. It's like, no, women, you have to listen to women. And I think it's very important. We are very important. We have a really good, outlook on things. But, I hate to say this, but, also not all women.
What's
just
that?
because not all women. Just because they're the woman in the relationship does not mean that they will make the best choices. But if they're in a situation where the man says whatever she says goes, sometimes you can run off in the wrong direction with that. So when I mean with my son, preparing him for that, I always make that joke. Your wife will always be right. I always joke about that. And I said, but, in this day and age, it's every corner he will turn, there will be somebody, an opinion, a group, a judgment, an article, something that will always undo any hard work you've done. So I always tell him, you really need to only do what you genuinely want to do and can live with every day, because people will pull their support on you in an instant.
Is that, I mean, I was going to say, is that part of this construct that we need to have for men, is to go, okay, you make your choice that's right for you. And that's the point. And the whole point of living in a free society is you can have difference of opinion, and that is okay. So is it a case from that perspective of, from your son's side of things, or for man perspectives, going, okay, you decide on what's right for you, and obviously go about things in a nice manner. I'm putting that, as a given. And if someone disagrees with you, that's okay. You don't have to agree with everybody. You need to be strong enough yourself and go, well, okay, I've got my opinion. This is my opinion. This is the way I'm going to live my life, and associate with people that are like that. And if someone disagrees, maybe have the discussion, but at the end of the day, you've got to decide on whether you take that on or not, and move in your direction. The point is that the strength that we need to be giving young boys.
Definitely as a default, I believe.
Yeah.
But I also believe teaching young boys more self-awareness at a young age, because you can tell a boy to do that and be strong and stick with your choices and whatnot. If it is within their upbringing and their character and what they desire as a human, that support and family and closeness and everything is more important, then they need to be prepared to sacrifice some of their wants in life for that. Therefore, whereas some young people go, I don't care. That's not important. What's important is that I am happy, I'm going to do great things, I'm going to work hard, and I'm happy to remodel my support system and those around me and cut loose. And we hear that all the time with this self-help, and people say, I'll get new friends and abandon your family, they're not healthy. If you're not actually looking first at that individual, of what they're like as an individual, what helps them cope, you're sending people in the wrong direction all the time.
Yeah.
That's what I believe, and that's why I'm very wary with my son of figuring what is important to him. And it always seems to surround. I mean, he's, for the last 5 years now, I know he's only young. Anytime anybody asks him what he wants to be when he grows up, he always says doctor, because that's something I influenced when I was younger. So I pushed off that a few years ago, and I realised he was only saying it because I said that's what I would like him to do. Yeah. So I learned very early on every word I say, because of our relationship, is very impressionable to him. And I don't want to take advantage and or abuse that at any point. So I've had to learn to hold back. And that's because I know I have a child who really values family, like mum opinion. And so I have to be careful of that. Whereas you got some little boys that just have none of that at all. And you can send them off in another direction, or really give them direction because they need it, And I think that's where there's a lot of issues. You can't have just one real construct. I think when there's more self-awareness at a young age, then at least we can direct them to the right construct.
Yeah.
If this is how you are and how you thrive, this really is the correct model for you. That will lead to of happiness and enjoyment and less issues, especially internally.
Yeah, that's a really important point that you say, this is how you are. Because when we look at it, I mean, there's a lot of talk out there about, the masculine stereotype, and you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, that type of thing. And I joke here facetiously, condom full of walnuts, what's it?
Yeah.
But they're talking about that as a masculine prototype. And I find that, I challenge that to start with, because of my experience. And I was posted to the SAS, and the guys there were, very, very tough.
Yes.
And we work with the TRG as well, the Tactical Response Group for the West Australian Police. Similar, I had friends here in that space. None of those guys fit that stereotype. They if you did not know that they were in that place, and you met them outside the world, you would never know. Yet these guys are lethal, and they could be lethal. They walked with a confidence, and you could see there was a confidence but they were confident in who they are. And that's where I'm wondering, because I have lots of male friends. Again, I have a number of male friends who are quite effeminate, and some of them are gay in that sense of, and that's not just saying part of that definition fits within there. My point with that is that they're confident in who they are in their space and not worried about what other people think. Is that, when we look at that as a construct you mentioned before, is that the manly type of thing that we need to say? It's not about whether you are this macho image. It's about understanding what's right for you and doing that. Is that what we need to be encouraging?
Yeah, I think the idea of what's like masculine, just because you hit the gym does not make you masculine, one iota to me. And I have seen, and I've had my girlfriends for years, pick apart partners and be like, oh my God, what is it about them? And that's because the sort of female that I am, or from my experiences, there's an element that I pick out, and they might not be the biggest, the tallest, the strongest, the buffest, but I would certainly put them down to be the deadliest and the most reliable. And that can go in both senses of the ways, not just those Jordan Peterson always says, like an articulate man is the most dangerous man.
Yeah.
Which, yes and no, I agree, I do. But you can't just have a whole lot of muscle behind you and not know where it's aiming. That's what he means about the articulation and the words of information. I mean, it's having your ducks in a row, being able to foresee a situation, like men that you can. For me, I've been around, I know for a fact, I've been with other men that think they're masculine or whatever, and they get right up in people's faces and they want to defend a woman and do all this sort of stuff. And really what I have found, the most appealing ones are the quiet ones. They hold the most reign. And that's because they give off that confidence, because they are sure of themselves and how to conduct themselves and how to read a situation.
I love that. I mean, we're going to have to end shortly for the radio listeners. But we'll continue on the other side. But when we continue on the other side of this, I want to touch on those points, the specific words that you mentioned there. If I can say specific words. not Pacific, specific words.
Yes.
You mentioned about reliable. We'll talk about that after the break. Muscle but no aim. I love that. And quiet confidence. So for the radio listeners, we do have to end here because we've run out of time. But if you do want to catch the rest of this, please tune into the podcast. So let's go back to this word reliable, because that was a very specific word, and what is it about? And this comes back to what you were talking about before with some of the people that were saying that they wanted this and they wanted that and all these different things, but the question was, what were they delivering? And I hear that a number of times where some men will want the woman to do all these kind of things. Well, let's say that the masculine, because then we include the same-sex couples as well. Because in a same-sex relationship, there's usually a masculine. I'm yet to see one that is two masculines together. It's usually a masculine and a feminine.
Oh, you see relationships are like that, and they end in disaster.
Oh, okay.
I believe, like when you're saying there's always one or the other, not always, and generally that's when you find it's a disaster, and that goes back to the beginning where we spoke about those constructs in a relationships that are agreed upon. People don't have that awareness anymore. There's so much mismatching in those.
Well, I mean, nature has it, whether you're nature or divine creation, whichever way you want to look at it. There's a purpose for the things that are the way they are, and certainly there's a complement. I consider myself very lucky that I had a mum who was very much saying that men and women both have their strengths. By coming together, you actually become more. And I'm sure that it implies masculine and feminine is in that space.
Definitely.
So, but from that perspective, because this reliable thing, is that when we're putting it in that framework, and you mentioned Jordan Peterson as well, who talks about this as well. It's like stand up with your back straight, I think is one of his quotes. It's like have a sense of responsibility. And I'm putting that reliable word in that context. Is that from a male construct? Is that something that and I've heard a number of women talk about it from the perspective of, there's one lady described it as the man is the mountain, and she is the ocean that moves around, and the ocean might get sometimes it might be stormy, sometimes it might be calm, and he's the mountain. And another one described it as a similar sort of thing. It was a water thing, whereas the woman is the flow. She's she's the empathy, all that kind of thing, and the man is the banks of the river. And there seems to be a lot of construct around that. Is that and this is where I want to touch on that word reliable. Is that something that's really important from when you're looking at a construct for being manly?
Oh, yes.
What is the importance? What is the importance of being reliable?
I think it's always fallen on men to be reliable from the dawn of
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And, that's the thing with that a lot of people forget to acknowledge is with the great privileges supposedly
Mm.
that men have always had, has always come the responsibility.
Mm.
And those things are, if you're not reliable, nobody's going to want to be around you. They're not going to help you. They're not going to support your
Mm.
cause. Reliability is important, and I think a lack of it comes from also knowing the full circle is for men themselves to be reliable, they get more strength from knowing they also have a woman that's reliable, and not in the same senses either.
Mm.
I
Right.
think there's a lot of lacking where I'm not putting blame on anybody, but in a lot of
Mm.
relationships,
Yeah.
side by side, there's not enough, like you said, clear constructs of roles and duties because I'm a big believer in strengths and weaknesses.
Mm.
I was in a relationship where I was basically 1950s housewife
Yeah.
and I also worked full time. And I had girlfriends or, at the time, my partner's mates' wives highly, highly disliked me
Mm.
because I would do that.
Mm.
And I said, don't forget I do this, A, because I genuinely enjoy it, B, because he can't. He can't.
Right.
He's a man and he cannot, and I think it's fine. Just like
Mm.
I'm a woman, I cannot, and it's fine. Comes the same sort of responsibility as well, because
Mm.
I would then highlight to them, well, your partner as a male will
Mm.
not do A, B, C, D, E either because you wanted to have an equal this and an equal that.
Mm.
I don't mow the lawns. As much as I love mowing the lawns, when I met him, that was a decision we made. That was something he liked and something he did. And mine
Mm.
was, cleaning and catering sort of thing. Now that's very traditional, but
Mm.
that doesn't mean that my desire as a woman should be diminished because women, nowadays don't like it or didn't like it back then or awful things happened.
Mm. Do you
So
think that when... Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, so it's always this modern day, everyday changes. So my son, for example, he seems to like the idea of this. Now, he hasn't been raised in a house with it like I was.
Mm.
And yet he still has this leaning to the desire of, that's what I would like for myself. But also when I was in that situation, he would say, Mum, why do you do everything? And I'd have to explain to him as still a young boy, because if you don't tell children enough, this is where I think a lot of bad opinions can be formed on father figures as well, is
Mm.
there's not enough encouragement of, oh, he's always at work, he's not here, he's this, he's that. I would always highlight, well, what you don't see is that they got up earlier and they did this, and now they're doing this and this. And if they
Mm.
don't do that, I can't do this, and we can't spend time together now. That's something that he has decided he likes. Whereas there are other children that don't, they really couldn't care less whether they saw their parents in the morning or not. But,
Yeah.
but they do like to go away. They like to have new bikes or this or that. And that comes, like I said, back down to just different types. Like my child really appreciates family time.
Mm.
Friends being out, it's always been a thing, we'll all put a spoon in a bloody watermelon on a beach because we don't care. But to a lot of other children, that won't be their thing. So what
Mm.
we teach them to appreciate, we also need to touch on whether they actually appreciate it or do they just grow up having to do it. And it's
Mm.
important establishing that in young age because these are directions young boys, they always say children soon become adults that make the same choices.
Yeah.
So, teaching consequences, and people always say age appropriateness that I haven't had with my son is probably the greatest flaw then for me because, yeah, children very soon become adults and can make the same. They always say children shouldn't be given the same consequences for choices they make as a child. I kind of disagree because you're missing opportunities to teach so that choices have consequences.
Well, don't children learn? I mean, isn't a lot of the formation of who they are is formed between the years, birth and 5 years?
Yeah. And there was a lot of discussion on I can't remember, I think it was Chris Wills, but it was with John Peterson. It was a similar thing about, you know, mothers can sometimes put themselves in a position to enable their child to make poor choices. You know, I gave an example about having you've got a sore tummy, you'll stay at home, you miss the test. People say, well, you can't blame that child because the mother supported that decision. No, but you can, because the child was given a choice and they made it. If you don't teach them there's a consequence, that very quickly spirals, and before you know it, they're grown up and they're adults and make the same decisions.
Is that a case too? Because you look at that from that perspective, and we're looking at that masculine feminine thing. The stereotypes is what I'm getting at with that. There's generally, for a mum, you know, the stereotype is the mum is a lot more, you know, empathetic. She feels it. Women are, you know, there's a lot of research that shows women are more empathetic.
Yeah.
So and as a mum, she's also protective, and so she feels the child's, you know, in pain, so to speak. Says, okay, you know, you've fallen over, you know, and whereas a dad will be like, get up and move on. And I know I did that with my son when he was young. He fell over and he was about to cry. I said, no, you're fine, move on. And he went, oh, and off he went. Now, obviously, there's a balance between doing that and denying, you know, an ability to express emotion. That's a different thing. But is there, from that perspective, when we're looking at, you know, this framework for what is manly, there is an element of, because we're coming back to this reliability. I mean, to be reliable in a situation where, you know, all hell's breaking loose, and then, you know, you breaking down and going, oh, I can't do it, because that's what you've been taught. Is that, you know, do we need to have that balance of going, hey, there's certain times where you just have to toughen up and deal with it, and other times where, you know, okay, deal with it in that moment. This is not the time to be having, you know, a namby-pamby attack. It's time to, and it's time to deal with that. Then later, if you need to download, this is how you do that. Is that the framework we need?
Definitely. And I was raised in, I guess people say, you know, traditional home, stay-at-home mum, dad that worked. I was still raised the same way. My brother and I. And that's my one notion I really took from childhood that I see separates me from a lot of people, just people my age. You do what you got to get done. We get it done. And then once it's done, if there's issues or emotions or challenges, whatever, we'll face them together when the time is appropriate. You know,
because does that fall under that reliability thing from a framework for being men? It's like, reliability is get it done, and then being reliable is being able to, you know, whether it's mindfulness or whatever, being able to recharge and adjust so you can come back and do that. Is that the flow?
And also with reliability also comes trust. So there came this, I have a really poignant memory from my childhood, and I was probably 13, and it was just one of those series of unfortunate events for the family. There was an unexpected death of a father, there was an unexpected suicide, and all of it happened in 3 days of each other.
Wow.
And then the aftermath of that, from my family's position as such, is there was, you know, cousins of mine that had to come and stay with us and people that had to be taken care of and all this sort of stuff. Life was just constant. And my brother and I, being older than the others, were just, it's a point and shoot, you know, and because, you know, we were always able to rely on our parents, what they said, not what they say goes, just means we're being shot in the right direction. Let's just do and ask questions later, because not everybody can have that relationship with people in life. If you find relationships like that, where questions can be asked later, then that's kind of a key quality that I want my son to have. Yeah. That I think a lot of men should strive for as well, because then, you know, a lot of men complain about how they're always questioned and they have to explain themselves. So what more can you do to set yourself up, present yourself where the questions are asked later, because you've shown such reliability and pillared sort of strength, you know. And I remember my mum came up to me and she said, back to that story, I said, are you okay? And she just said, it's tough. She nearly broke down and she said, I'm so sorry that I have been ignoring you. And I said, oh, no, not at all. they're more important right now. And she point blank said, yes, they are. Now, that didn't diminish my importance at all, but it just redirects that life is not always about you. And I think by learning at a young age is such this idea that only women are capable of caring for everybody. You know, men don't have the ability to. They do, just in different ways. And I think that's why that's important, like for him. That's what to try and encourage him, similar scenarios. And a very obvious one the other night was I had a series of unfortunate events weekend. And then, the dog's in the pet hospital and I'll go to pick her up at 9 o'clock at night and I hadn't sorted dinner and my brother is unwell. And I said, oh, son, what are we going to have, for dinner? And he said, Mum, what's important right now is picking Sam up from the vet. She's the most important thing right now. And realign my focus. And because he took charge in that noise, I was like, oh my God, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. So there's like this immediate, he's a 10-year-old boy, a 32-year-old woman. And yet in that moment, he was more reliable than I was.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
In critical thinking and that's life. Life is this continuously. So to see him really, I guess, raise the bar when it's time.
How did you teach that reliability? I mean, for him to be able to do that, how did you set that framework for him?
I kind of drilled it into him in similar situations where he would, I guess, the emotions and the mamby-pamby and whatever, very quickly reiterate, I understand, but now is not the time. And I would very specifically tell him at a young age, as my child, my only child, and I adore him, but I still have no hesitation in telling him that it is not all about him and that he is not the most important.
I love those words that you used there, though. Now is not the time. It's not saying there isn't a time. It's not saying you shouldn't do this. It's like now is not the time.
Yes.
There isn't a point. There is a point where this, need to deal with that because we need that balance, don't we? I mean, we need to be able to. I mean, especially
I think we also
for me,
needs to be sometimes given that second opportunity for people when you say, like I've been in a lot of my relationships where I have the men that I'm with and it's now. This urge to discuss or argue something is now. And I have that moment of now is not the time. And it becomes the time. That's the time they want. And what they don't realise is what I'm trying to say is if your opinion is exactly the same and just as valid and you're feeling this in the future, as in 24 hours time, whatever, if you still feel exactly the same, then there is an issue and we can discuss it properly. But a lot of the time, feelings in a moment trigger this intense need to have arguments and do this and do that, when really I think some people do need a minute to just recalibrate. And it's not that they don't have an issue, it's just their direction with that issue becomes more constructive if given a little bit of time.
That's an interesting point that you raised because my son's karate sensei, he has 5 Ds for dealing with conflict. And the first D is distance, which is again putting that time between yourself and the issue. To that point as well, I mean, what you're also touching on there, or what I'm reading into what you're touching on there, is listening. From that perspective, in the framework of being manly, and I know it applies to both genders, but what about, from that perspective of teaching men to, again, be that, that rock? Because I look at my granddad in that perspective. He was always very quiet. And another example was Nelson Mandela's dad, from what I understand and read about, was he was the chief, but he would allow everyone, not allow, but he made sure everyone else spoke first before he spoke. Part of this manly framework is that we need to get, rather than men jumping up and down going, "Rrr," we need to have that more quiet rock persona where we listen first.
Yes. Giving everybody an opportunity as well. And also teaching boys, men, that it's okay as a man to stand there and listen to other people's opinions. Doesn't
Mm.
mean you're a weak man, and it doesn't mean you don't have an opinion at all. But you don't have to be the first to speak, because there's a lot of, I guess, courage in that when a man allows everyone in the room to speak before, I guess,
Yeah.
finalising. Sometimes you can sit, God, you can just look at a judge in a courtroom sometimes. Sometimes they're genuinely listening
Mm.
and then comes down their opinion. And the other times, what they want to say and what they're thinking, it's there, and
Mm.
they're just going through the motions of listening to the room. But it's just white noise.
Yeah. I mean, because I raised that, and I love what you've said about it's okay to listen to the other person's opinion, but it's also that you mentioned about being a powerful thing. And I know this from, I mean, I have a negotiation program that I teach to large corporates, and that's one of the most powerful sources of power is to listen, and quietness, because also quietness, most people are uncomfortable with it, so they'll blurt out lots of information. It's a great way of gathering information, and that being the point is that you're gathering information to be informed to then decide on what to do. And that's why I'm wondering, from that framework of what is being manly, is it a place where we need to be spending more time teaching men, hey, a bit about mindfulness, about being quiet, but also recognizing that that is strength, to be able to sit there and listen to somebody or stand and
Yeah.
be okay with it, with acknowledging what their position is, because you are strong in your own self. And I'm saying self, not in your own opinion, but in your own self, to go, okay, I can take this on board. Is that part of that framework?
Definitely. And as he's said before, is that the road to competence is asking a lot of questions and also just listening. And he explains,
Yeah.
as a man with a high level of competence, you have to enter every situation where you're not the most competent, but people will acknowledge you as competent because your ability of being able to listen to them and ask questions and admit that you are not fully competent. And that then builds more trust in somebody who doesn't say, oh, I know everything, that willing to listen, observe a room, take it all in. That shows a lot of competence and security, I'd say. If I was able to be in a room like that, and for a man to sit there and be able to, that not just a man, but to be able to take it all in and then form an opinion, or even better, ask more questions just to validate the situation. There's a lot more trust in that as well, because you're watching them take that time to consider everything and everyone, gender aside as well, and then formulate it. And then that trust of reliability, that's the man. That's the man, because he's the one that listens, takes it all in, and then makes, an educated, format information. That's what he says. It's, your army in line for battle.
Yeah.
That's where it comes from.
Is that, because coming back to that experience you relayed about your son and saying, hey, it's more important to pick up, was it Sam, the dog?
Yes.
Yeah. Because when you're looking at that, I mean, and I'm reading into that, I wasn't there, but from the way you describe it, it sounds like, I mean, you were dealing with a whole bunch of things, so it sounds like you're a little bit stressed at that point in time. But it sounds like your son was, and it wasn't just listening to words, he was able to listen more broadly to what the environment was. And then that's when he made his comment to you. How is that, firstly, am I reading that correctly? And if so, how did you teach him to have that listen, to have that awareness? I'll use that in the term awareness as for listening.
I guess I always have had a bad habit, which I guess is a good habit, of questioning him, in the sense, people say they ask how their child felt, and he'll tell me things, and then I'll always double question him. Or if he's got an opinion, I'll always pick it apart. And that is not to tear him down, and that is not to disagree with him. It is to teach him that if you say something, you feel something, you mean something, the world around you will always try and tear you down. So you need to become confident or competent in everything that you want, so that you don't let other people tear you down, not even mum.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to teach them. And I always teach them as well. You're really the only one that has to live with yourself and your choices.
Love that. And from that perspective as well, I want to come back to what you'd mentioned before. You talked about muscle and no aim. And I love that statement. It's so cool. But what it leads to is having a direction. So when we're talking about, because you're talking about, there's a number of, we started with a number of men lost, not feeling they're contributing to society. How much of that do you think is not having a direction? And, how do we teach people to have a direction?
I don't know how to teach it. And rather, we shouldn't be teaching, and I guess the word would be establish. What do we have in place that helps young men, young boys establish where they want to be, where they want to go? And I mean, that's from, having more. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I was in high school, but I notably there was a lot in place for us young girls, and not young boys. And I still find that a lot. And yes, there's a lot of issues that young girls face and women face and everything like that. But women are generally surrounded by more women who are even more competent to support and guide. And I saw these when you read constant articles about there's obviously a high suicide rate in men more than women, and it actually went back and said that is generally because a man is more focused on effectiveness and has the ability to be more violent, therefore is actually just more effective. Whereas 3 times the amount of women in the same study had thought about it, but had not done it.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, because everything's a big circle of relation, isn't it? And the same statistics are for, 4 times as many men are going to, commit suicide in that age bracket to 45. It's the same statistic for women dying at the hands of intimate partner violence.
Well, interesting. I didn't know that.
They're not directly related, but
I'm interested. Yeah, so from that point that you raised there before, that you said women are more surrounded by women, because that's a point that interests me, and it's come up a few times in discussions I've had on this topic, because I relate that to my growing up. Now, when I was little, I went to, my dad played golf, and I went with my dad to play golf with him. And my dad played lawn bowls, and I went and played lawn bowls with him. But in doing so, obviously I had a connection with my dad, but it moved from where I was playing with him to I was playing with the group. So when we went to play golf, for example, and they formed a 4, I didn't just stay with my dad. I went with another bunch of guys. And same playing bowls, we'd turn up together, but then I'd be in a team with a whole bunch of other people. And what I found from that was, when I look back at that, I hadn't thought about it at the time, but now when I look back at it, there was all these mentors that I had, male mentors around me, who were gentlemen and appropriate behaviour, that were guiding and encouraging me and supporting me to be myself. And I think it's only now I'm really starting to appreciate how much that meant to my development. And I'm just wondering, do we need more of that for boys to be? Because now, when you look at it, you've got your women's gyms and things like that. There's all these things that are as much as we have equality, there are so many things that are just women only. But if there's a man's gym, for example, and this is not jumping on a bandwagon or anything like that, the point of that conversation is, have we lost those places where men can just be men? Because I look at it, because again, I look at it from my son's perspective. He's 14 now, and some male friends and we catch up every now and then and play poker, and it's a very manly thing. We, to put it in, if we were to put it in a metaphor perspective, it's guys, holding their heads down and farting on each other's heads, and that doesn't physically happen, but that's the kind of environment it is. And it's not, there's no derogatory comments about women like that, but it's just fart jokes. That's what it is. And most women would not appreciate that or want to be part of that. But the thing was, when I first brought my son to that, I was wondering, okay, how's he going to handle this? Because there's a fair bit of sledging there as well. Where we're all in a comfortable space, but we're all knocking each other and then standing up to that. And, and I look at that from that male perspective of, the two rams butting heads to actually find their strengths and learn skills, that kind of thing. And I wondered how he would go. Now, to be fair, my son's, he's nearly six. Well, at the time he was nearly 6 foot. He's 6 foot now, and he's got a black belt in karate, so he can do a lot of push-ups. He's fairly well built, so he looks a lot older than he is. Which I didn't think about it, but I was wondering how is he going to react. Well, when the sledging started, because my friends didn't know actually how old he was. Some of them are broader friends, and they had never met, and they just assumed he was older. So they treated him like an adult, and they threw some stuff out, which was fascinating. That he actually fired back really well and held his own. And it was a great environment for him to be, as you said before, people are going to challenge you in life. So he was put in this environment where he was challenged. He stood up and dealt with that. And that's what I'm wondering. Do we really need to encourage that more? We that it is okay for men to have these men's spaces where we develop that way.
Definitely. I think there's always the misunderstanding that if you create a men's only space, that it breeds violence and hatred and, putting against the women. And, my least favorite term in the world is toxic masculinity. And that was born out of the same 80s movement of men wanting to take back men only spaces. And it was deemed toxic masculinity and dangerous. And here we are still misusing the term 40 years later. So that is always, it was a problem then. It's going to be even more of a problem now. But I still believe that there needs to be more of it. Like, there is no one place, especially also single mum. And that's not just single mum because I'm not with his father. His father is absent from the picture. And so therefore, this isn't just, a lot of women say that they're single parents, and yes, they are, but they'll also fail to mention they also have a current partner. So although it's not their father, there's a male within their household, so this is when I'm very specific for saying, as a single mother, I, want more this and this. Now, I'm lucky enough to have good father, good brother, so he's got good male role models there, but it's still not enough. It's really not enough. And there's nowhere I can just say, well, I should take him to that club or that space or that this. And, we wonder why there's so much, youth gang violence in, young boys, because what they're trying to create their own things within the bounds of not having, some of them not stability, also no money, because everything costs money, so those, I guess, supervised ideas of spaces are where problems are bred. But then people also believe that we have designated spaces, it will breed more problems. So
is it a control thing where it's like we on one hand, some people they go, okay, we want men to be men, but we want to say how that is going to be at the same time. Do you think that might be part of that?
Yeah, and it's a control thing. But it's also trying, like I said, reliable and trustworthy. When a lot of these things have happened before, or ideas of trying to create spaces like that, unfortunately, there has not been a good result of a reliable, trustworthy person spearheading it. There are people with ill intentions, or, there always seems to be a failure to it, not because they're a man, but because the person's intention or the person overseeing it gets it wrong.
Is that a political? Because I won't mention the organisation, but there was at the start of this year there was an article in the main press about, and I won't mention the name of the person, but it's quite a famous guy that's termed as misogynistic and things like that, and probably rightly so. But the article was that he had a grip hold on young men. And that was the article about that. And, 90% of young men had heard of his name. And, I think it was 54% of men agreed with his opinion. And it was this article about how negative the effect was. Now, I was curious. So I contacted the organisation and said, can I get a copy of the report? I just wanted to see the data behind that and what was the specifics of it. It took 2 months. They eventually got back to me with the report after chasing it up a couple of times. But I got the report, and then when I looked at it, majority of, although public figure, so they've heard of him. Okay, put that aside. Yeah. Majority of the young boy, and it was a 1,400 or 1,200 something. It was a large survey. More than 50% didn't agree. Almost all didn't agree with his views on women. But when you went through the data and you looked at specifically what was in there, when they said, okay, what are the parts you do agree with? And the parts that they did agree with was he's confident. He's physically fit. He takes care of his body. They were the parts that they did agree with. And there was only one area where they asked where it dealt with his views on women. And it was 15% of the boys agreed with his views on women. But the point of what that view was the view, and the specific statement was, he considers women sometimes difficult to understand. So from this article about how and rightly, I think the person is misogynistic. But what I took from that is, out of this person who is openly misogynistic, these 1,200 or 14, I can't remember the exact number, 1,400 young boys that were interviewed were able to isolate the parts that they liked. None of them agreed with the point that women are, the misogynistic type of view of women. And the only part they did agree was that sometimes women are difficult to understand. And my concern I raised this with the organisation, I said, well, isn't that a misrepresentation, what you put out in this public article of what our young boys are experiencing? It was, to me, I was looking at going, this is so refreshing that young boys can look at someone like that and make the distinction. That's how I read that report. And
yeah.
Do you think there's a little bit too much out there of sensationalization of things that are not quite accurate?
Oh, hugely. When you were telling me at the beginning of that, I was I thought I was picking up on a statistic of over half agreed with the misogynist and, whatever. And my argument was going to be yes, but everybody's opinion behind a closed door and who they are in reality are two different things. So there might be men who agree and think that, but they'll never dare be like that.
Yeah.
So, but at the end of that, yeah, I think a lot of the problem is, broadly, as you said, is not breaking things down enough. So, of that survey of this many men, if you just give the broad statement to a woman, that man agrees with that misogynist, therefore he's a bad man, right? And women will jump on that and say, you like that guy? Instead of realizing they doesn't like him and he doesn't agree with certain comments and ways to treat and speak to women, but he admires his confidence, his level of self-care, yada, 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 which you go and ask a woman what she wants in a man, she's going to top list those things.
Yeah.
So it's a constant hold of people really need to break down for men a lot more, and men as well. Like, oh, well, I can't like a guy like that, or have any sort of, if I want to be too strong, then I'm too this, or I'm too misogynistic if I want to do this. And there needs to be more encouragement to break down manly characteristics that are okay. It's okay to be manly. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. I think it's okay to tell a boy to, you fall over, you get up, just like I'm going to tell a girl. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's a core human childhood thing. That's come from primitive days. That's not like something new.
Yes.
If then there is the X signal of, no, I'm actually hurt, which is where the biggest problem of that comes with, then people need to sit down more, especially is, did we teach them that pain was only felt like that because it was new to your body? It was a new experience. But it doesn't deserve the same reaction every time.
No, and I relate to that, like similar sort of experience. I had that with my son, as I mentioned younger, when he fell over, get up. We were skiing a few years ago. He fell over, didn't get up. And I initially my thought was get up. And he goes, no, my leg really hurts. Turns out he broke it. So it wasn't get up and ski down the hill. It was making that assessment and dealing with that situation as it is. And that's where I was wondering from that perspective, do we really need to be having more of that conversation with men and going, hey, let's not generalize here. Let's one, be more, you choose what's right for you, but also putting into that case of the listening to being awareness of yourself and your environment. Do we need to be having more of that training talk for men to say, hey, let's listen, and it is okay. You can stand strong and listen to another person's opinion as well.
Yes. And I feel that there's not enough spaces for men to, as we already know, there is generally, the higher statistics are men don't talk about their issues as much, and if they do, they don't talk to other men about it, or the worst part is the men they're talking to, other men that aren't seeking help or have never got help and have very blunt opinions. So some men, the first time they reach out to another man, that negative experience will then really stop them. So
that's again, I come back to that. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, just like that reteaching of I guess you go to that one. That's not the end. You need to try again. Go to another male or another group or something like that, and it's the same as how we went to the beginning. When a man knows what he wants and wants to go for that person doesn't agree with him and or help him, we tell him to get new friends. Why do we not encourage the same with men's mental health and that safe space? Because they always say, I tried, or I went here or there. Well, you're going to have to try again.
Well, and that's an important point that you raised about this trying again, and that's where I want to come talk about that experience of having those safe male places. Because again, I think I'm quite lucky in that space where I had that experience. I had those people when I was younger. I've never had a problem asking for help. Same token too, and I'm going to put this in that gender stereotype, I don't want to be sitting there talking about my problems all the time. If I've got a problem, I do what I call gumping. I've got a big lawn at the beach house, and I've got a self-propelled lawnmower. I go out there, and if I've had a big day, whatever, I don't push it, but I walk behind it, going up and down, and I have my space, my safe space. I don't want to talk about it, but if I need help with something, because I've had those role models where I know people I can ask for help, and I've had some really wonderful mentors where if I need to ask for something or if I've got an issue to deal with, I've got those safe spaces that I know to ask for help. And that's where I was coming back to that whole point of this. We were talking about reliability and direction, having that ability to know and teaching people how to ask for help, but also too, you need to again find your own space, because I literally don't want to be talking about it forever. That's not my thing.
Yeah. And another important part that I must mention is I do also believe that within some men's conversation, men's having spaces, is there should also sometimes be female input for the sake of the right reason. So I don't know how many goddamn barbecues and parties I've been to, and I'm always with the men. That's purely because my ex used to be like, oh, you'll have to, and I don't want to, but you're going to have to hang out with the wives and girlfriends. And I always did to a point, and then it got to a point where I just couldn't do it anymore because I was arguing with them about certain things, because that is a tendency when one gender gets together is to bitch about the other, not constructively. I would want to have solution-based conversations with other women, not let's just sit there and hang shit on them. Vice versa with the boys, and as soon as I then go and take, I guess, seriously, and not just because I'm a woman, but listening from a female who has a positive male approach makes the conversation easier, because there's that, oh, what do the women think? Or you're getting the guy who's got great advice, but is that really only based on his wife only? Or is it based on his mother or his sister that he doesn't like? Or, so there's so many variables. Half the time he'd always say, look, I'm worried about such and such. And he'd consult with me on how to consult his male friend.
Yeah.
Because he knew he didn't have the best advice possible. But he needed to hear it from another male. He knew he was the only male that he was going to talk to about this. but he had to give him the right, so he then learnt on, and that's not that women have all the answers because we don't, but I mean, there does need to be that positive influence. There's not enough, I don't believe there's enough female, I guess you'd say, models around within the male frameworks that aren't arguing the opposite point. I feel like there's not enough positivity.
Is that creating a safe space to actually open up? Because from my experience, guys will talk, if they're in a safe space.
Yeah. And, whether that's men or women, so some men only want to speak to women. Yeah. Which is great as well. It doesn't matter who you're talking to as long as you're talking, especially as a male in this day and age as well. And it's consistent. But talking is talking, but, if it comes from another male, there's a lot more confidence within that this works, or this worked for me, or, hey, I don't know, but why don't you try this,
Yeah.
Anybody that shows that they give a shit when someone's reaching out for help, that's not met with, a joke or whatever. And this is when this is why I was referring to the suicide statistics earlier. That's also if you don't include all the hugely related deaths in males that are related to alcohol and substance abuse. Which
that's another topic, than that.
It's another coping mechanism. Some women will go to their coffee club groups with their women every week, and some men prefer to sit silent at a bar and drink. Whether that's generational, whether that's statistical, that's just a thing. Coping mechanisms have their own downfalls in every way. But we want to say, they're just a larrikin, or it's just a culture, or the boys did it, or, and I just don't think.
No, it's okay. I mean, the coping mechanism is a good way of putting that. It's how we deal with that. It's my coping is, and how I deal with things is my gumping, and it works for me. That's my mindfulness, where I go and get my quiet. Can have a really, really busy day.
But
sometimes long one, even. Yeah.
There's a high chance that nobody is affected by you doing that.
Oh no, 100%. Yeah. It's
so that's where I think that people finding ways to do things, not realising the effect that it has on others. And unfortunately, those silent intakes of things and you say yours is the equivalent of having a beer. Yes, it is, but it doesn't have the same potential to have a negative impact on that person. Furthermore, by them doing that particular activity. This is why everybody likes the idea of the...
Well, that comes back to what you're saying is reliability as well, isn't it? You're dealing with things in a way that you can be reliable to the wider world.
Yeah. And then you've got some women that think, the boys are just, he's just having his drink after work, or, whatever. And, that's probably good for them in one way. But then there's also the downside, because for some people that, men, not only men, but men, intake of alcohol can lead to, not good home situations either.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, alcohol. Yeah, that's a whole.
So many
whole topic in it.
and it's all out of there. It's just more about, we're always talking about, spaces and talking and all these things for so long. Not just alcohol, but things like alcohol are talking. And how do we transform that?
Yeah, that's a good
point.
Not
alcohol is the problem. Alcohol's the devil, but alcohol it's literally just another thing.
There's an underlying issue there that's being, as you say, it's a coping way of coping with whatever other issue there is. Yeah. I do want to, before we get, because we have touched on it a couple of times, we've talked about suicide, and I do want to, for the audience listening, if anyone is listening that, has, feeling alone or concerned and may have those tendencies, please reach out to somebody as well, because you're not alone. There are people around to help. So I just wanted to cover that off as well. But from that side of things, where we're talking about, this coping, and you mentioned before, because it all seems to be coming, and you mentioned about quiet confidence. So it seems to be this reliability, you being a reliable person, you having a direction. You mentioned, what was it, muscle but no aim, but so having an aim. Do you think all that creates that being able to listen, which we've talked about? Do you think all that for a man creates that, or a young boy creates that quiet confidence?
Yeah, I think it all contributes to it, definitely. Yeah. And I think obviously it's harder to learn at a young age, because they teach all the, you sit in the classroom, boys and girls, and we're all going to listen and but they never explain why they're listening. It's only with the definite fact. It's actually not to learn, it's just to have respect for others. And look, I'm all about respect. But if the main goal is to actually learn, disagree, negotiate, argue, not just respect as well. You argue in a respectful way. Same with quiet confidence. It's a one in the same. You can be daggering somebody, telling them what you want without a word even leaving your mouth. And that's quiet confidence. That's also knowing it's probably a lot of confidence within that person that if need be, there's certain things there to back them up, to show how reliable they are, to show how strong they are and all that. But, the ultimate feat is that they don't actually have to show you. Just enough to know.
Because, I wonder about that, and I often think because when you watch people debating and things like that, where they're going on about, and for me, when I'm looking at it, and they're saying this is my opinion, and they'll be talking over the other person. I'm going, isn't that just the definition of what narcissism is? You're just stating your opinion without consideration of the other person, but you're claiming the high moral ground, but you're not even listening.
Yeah.
I wonder
I've gotten that a lot in people's automatic assumption is as soon as you question them on something or that it's an immediate, beyond debate, it's full-blown argument. It's just this constant justification of I'm right. And I've had so many, somehow they've turned into arguments because for me, if I don't understand where you're coming from or your opinion, I want to know more. Now, the only way I'm going to learn that is to ask questions, but we're in a culture, if you ask too many questions, you're actually arguing. You're not listening. And no, that's just my thirst for knowledge. I can't respect your opinion unless you can clarify to me how you got there, not just because you're quoting off Wikipedia. I need to really know. People are telling me something. I can respect it. Even if I disagree with it, I have respect for somebody who knows what they're talking about. They've done the research and they've got the confidence and they've got the time to tell me. This doesn't mean I'm going to agree with them.
But isn't that what you're talking about with the quiet confidence you mentioned before? It's you're able to say, hey, okay, I can listen to that, and then I can articulate my position. And whether we agree or not, well, it doesn't really affect my confidence because I've got my opinion. I've listened to yours and I've taken that on board. I don't agree with it, or I do agree. I've learned something new, whatever. But is that what that quiet confidence is?
Yeah, and that's that. I think we're that common line of let's agree to disagree. That's that something not
good's coming
if we keep it this way. So let's just leave it at that. You know what I mean?
But isn't that the case for a lot of things if you're having that debate? And just said what I'm wondering about from that framework of being manly as well is it's a big world. We can have differences of opinion and still get along. We don't have to have the same view. I don't have the same view as some of my is my dad, and I have a great relationship with my dad.
Yeah, I think it's just as important to be surrounded by people with different opinions because there's more confidence.
It inspires growth, doesn't it?
In growth and awareness because you got both sides of the field sitting at one table at all times. That's constant openness, and I've got friends with polar opposites, but the genuine value within us is no matter what, there's pure honesty at all times without judgment. And they can make, and I've got friends that make all sorts of remarks to me and jokes, and they really are jokes because I can turn around just as badly and say, well, people say, oh, I'm laughing because I thought that she was ridiculous or whatever, and I can say, well, no, you're laughing because you're too insecure to admit you feel the same way. No, it's not always the case, but I mean, when you have that level of rapport with everybody, that's not based on us just solely agreeing.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard saying about being inside a women's bathroom?
Without. But this, I mean, the honesty without judgment, isn't that respect? Showing respect.
Yeah, basically.
I'm putting it because to me that's how I'm written. But honesty without judgment, so you can go, okay, I can accept your honesty without judging you. and that's me showing you respect.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, though, I mean, I've come across a lot of people that say they respect me or my opinion when really that's just their.
No, but I mean, that's obviously they're not honestly, respecting you, are they? I mean, if they.
But that's what I mean. Like, where do we continually get these notions that every conversation and discussion we have to be armored with all this political correctness rather than just having, and this is what I teach my son.
Yeah.
Just because they say this and this and this, they don't mean it, and that's not to make him hyper vigilant to the world, but it's also to not make him ready for the plucking either.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that comes back to what you're saying, is that quiet confidence. He can, as you said, he can listen to the situation. You had that with the dog scenario where he can be aware of what's going on, and then he can quietly, confidently say, this is what I think we should do.
And I think
some people may not agree with that, but it sounds like he's going to go his own way anyway.
And that age appropriateness thing, I think if you're dealing with young boys without realising tomorrow they'll be young men, that's where a huge gap happens a lot, I think, for boys.
Yeah.
And I speak to him, and it's not about making him grow up too fast. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just about being realistic, because the same will happen for him in the blink of an eye. He'll be an adult. And if he's been mamby-pambied or told everything's going to be fine, or you've got 20 years till you worry about that, then it's there. What now? And it's not enforcing it. It's just sprinkling the trail there. So that, i.e., that, that what happened on the weekend is a perfect example. And then the next day I ended up in hospital because I had this infection thing that clogs my breathing. And I'm like, I couldn't really talk, whatever. And everyone's like, oh, what are you going to do? And he's like, oh, I'll go with you, Mum. So my mother was like, where is he? And I said, he's with me. He came to the hospital with me. She said, well, why? I said, he wanted to. He didn't come because he couldn't have Mummy out of his sights and, oh, my God, poor Mum. He came because he really wanted to take control of that situation, and he did exactly that, because I really couldn't talk. And at 10, he was able to articulate and quite confident, because he's also nearly, so he's up to here. So he also looks way beyond his years, but, still got a little kid's voice. But the way that he conducted himself, he wanted to do that because he was given an option to do it. He wasn't forced to do that. I wasn't making him do it. That's what he wanted to do. And I also didn't let him be mamby-pambied by saying, no, you can't. They say the greatest female crucifixion is letting your child out into the world.
Yeah.
And it can be. Really. I don't want to. I don't want to let him ride his bike to school.
Yeah.
But at some point I have to stop thinking about all the negative and focus on everything I've implemented since he could ride a bike, of road safety, stranger danger, all this sort of stuff. There's only so much you can tell them, especially a young boy, without then literally just living their life for them. At some point you have to. So when you focus enough in there, I think my son, when I was focused on the point of always knowing I was raising a man, is where I think that I will see a lot more of that come out in his adulthood without struggle, rather than, oh, my baby's grown up.
I love that. Raising a man.
Yeah, I didn't enjoy it. I mean, God, I would have loved to have just soaked it up and mamby-pambied here and babied him. And I would have loved to have, but, and for how long we live these days, childhood is a blip.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Before you know it, you're in adulthood, and people spend half their adulthood recovering from their short childhood.
That's a good point too.
No, it sounds awful to think of it, but I've always wondered like that. When I was younger and unemployed, and I've been through DV, and I was really at the bottom of the barrel, and there's judgments array, and I'm a single mum raising a son without a father figure, and I was on, so government assistance as well. So there's another layer of judgment, and probably the outlook for him was quite low comparatively. Child, single mother, been through dinner, all that sort of business, and that really drove me to think no. And I used to say to people, I am raising a tax-paying man who's going to be running the show in 30 years. People used to laugh. And it does. It sounds ridiculous, but, I'm a big picture thinker. And
I love what you've done there. And this comes back to what you were talking about, muscle and no aim, but you've set a very specific aim for him. You've set a future role model. This is where we're aiming for you, which I think is really important. In my opinion, that's really important. But it sounds like, it's when we put in that framework, you've set that as an intention for him.
And I've done it in a way so he understands that is really bare minimum. That's bare minimum of what I expect. And then once he gets to adulthood and he's capable and he's confident and all this, feels confident within himself and masculine in however way that will be, then he can do whatever he likes, or chase whatever goals. But the other thing is, with him taking that role, I also teach him if you are like that as you become a man, your wife, your children, those around you will have such trust in you, you also get all that love and support back tenfold. Which is what you need to continue to keep doing what you're doing. So everybody plays a role in a young boy's life, and I think it's not undoable, but it's important. It's important what goes on, and I don't mean special. Just like we give attention to young girls, we have to be overly protective. We have to teach them from a young age. And I mean, I've had my son ask me about some things that YouTube, I don't know where he hears it, it's obviously adult things, and I have to tell him the truth, because if I don't, as a young boy in this day and age, it's like he wrote a love letter to a girl at school, and I said, you can't do that. And he said, why? And I'm like, we should be encouraging this. This is beautiful. This is young love. This is positive. The world we live in, that can get crumpled and twisted so bloody quickly.
Yeah.
And I said, you just can't risk it. I said it can't be, because it might not come across the same way. Then you've got that problem, So I'm stripping back to, instead of telling him right from wrong now, what people may perceive of him or what may go wrong, I'm just trying to instill the confidence of, if you are genuine from where you are coming from, you'll be able to take on anything that comes your way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I love that. There's a lot we've discussed in this topic. And I think you've covered quite a fair bit of this framework. But I love those key points that you brought out about being reliable, having a sense of direction, and this quiet confidence. Is there anything you'd like to add to that to sum it up?
I know they're just things I've always. I'm glad that I've been able to go against the grain of a lot of people's opinion, because I'm he is going to reap those rewards, and I can see it already at a young age. And I hope that it only gets better, and that he doesn't have such negative experiences as a man, and maybe he'll start to teach me things before you know it, because he actually is a boy. I mean, we'll be a man, and I just don't want to make the mistake of modelling a man out of what I want or what I find lacking in men. It's just what I've found works, and that's, for example, the man I was raised by and things like that. And every desire he has or things he talks about in the future, I wrap them all back to him and how he's going to be as a man in this world. So he understands it's very important. You can make mistakes in that, but be conscious of it at all times.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Nathalie, thank you very much for sharing. It's been very, very insightful, particularly, I said, from a mum of a 10-year-old boy, and how, this framework of what is manly and how do we raise young men. So really, really appreciate your input on that.
Yeah, thanks for talking to me. It was good to discuss.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.